Well, but it's the nature of the procession. If you proceed from the source that is a father, then you must be a son and an only son because of the nature of a procession. Have you ever heard the word procession? Have you paid heed to the prefix pro in the word procession?
This is gonna be stuff like that. Like well, you see, the word responsible. It's in the word. Response. Able. You have to be able to respond. Part of what moral responsibility is.
This isn't even my final song, but this is to go even further beyond.
That's levels of like the Batmobile shows up and then after the fight the Chris Fisher's like, what's the difference between you and me? I'm not wearing hockey pants. Fools!
Trinity Radio, does Warren affirm sola fide, and does he think God is corporeal?
Oh man, I don't think we have enough time to unpack what they mean by sola fide. The siren is a Calvinist. I affirm that faith alone, as it's commonly understood, is sufficient. Yes.
Okay.
But I don't believe in pre-faith regeneration where God imbues us with this divine gnosis so that we can. I don't affirm some of the entailments that are often associated with that through the Reformed paradigm.
Why would he ask a question if you think God is corporeal?
Does God have a body?
Yeah.
No, I mean, God is a spirit, and no one has seen him except through the Son. I do believe that God, the Son, is now and forever corporeal, and I think that speaks to my theory of time and dynamic omniscience. By the way, Braxton, jab. But I do believe that God, as the Son, is corporeal. I think he's going to have scarred hands and feet. I think he's going to be able to hug and high five, and I think it's going to be great spending eternity with him. But the Father, the Spirit, no.
So you saw in the clip I played that Warren McGrew said he doesn't believe that God has a body. Now I asked that question on the basis of a picture I saw previous to the discussion with Braxton and Pritchett. Warren was commenting on a book from an Old Testament scholar that had written a defense or a book basically arguing that the God of the Hebrew Bible was corporeal. And it seems like in his comment, he was agreeing with her, or any atheist that may hypothetically jump on her defense of that view. In response to some atheists saying, the God of the Hebrew Bible has a literal body, he says in response, because he thinks, me agreeing, this is me quoting, me agreeing and thinking the God of the New Testament is one and the same and has a body now. It seems to me that that would imply that God does have a body and still does, basically. It's not something just merely Jesus takes on in the incarnation. It's something true of the divine essence. And that's what I think these atheists are getting at. They're getting at the objection is basically like this idea that God is immaterial, separate from the world. That is an alien concept to the scriptures. That's basically what they're arguing. They're arguing that God by nature is a physical being. And it seems like Warren agrees. And there is no good reconciliation I saw from at least the clip we saw before. Clearly I didn't get to ask a full question because time constraints and what you can actually post in the chat. But it seems to me that even further evidence has come to the light that Warren really does think God has a physical body. That being recently, Warren has participated in a debate review with Chris Fisher and Sean Griffin, and the debate was between Sean Griffin and there's another gentleman there, I forget his name, but so the debate was between Sean Griffin and Anthony Rogers, and Sean Griffin maintains that God is corporeal and that God is made out of water and blood, apparently. I don't really care to dive in depths of the Griffin theology. My point is, Warren participates in this debate review, doesn't really distinguish his position, and seems perfectly fine with people advocating that God is just a corporeal being. He has no objection to it. He just hangs about and seems to basically agree, especially when he lets Chris Fisher answer on his behalf, saying that they both do hold that God is physical, not as incarnate, not something he takes on. It's something he is by his divine essence.
My beloved son, he says that was a creature in time that was pre-programmed by God in his eternal decree, because the body of Jesus cannot be God. So if you're ever dealing with someone who's in a hypostatic union or Calvinism or anything, ask them, they'll say Jesus was 100% God, but 100% man. Ask them if the 100% part of him, which was man, if that part was God. And they have to say no, because it can't be, because then they're adding parts to the substance. They're adding material to the substance of God, which they want God being pure simplicity. And so the 100% part of Jesus, which is man, has no overlap with the 100% that is God. So the sire, I think this is our resident Calvinist who likes to pop in and be bombastic. He says, does everyone here actually think God has a body? Yeah, we're Trinitarians, so we think God has a body. Unlike you, the sire Vermin. I guess you're the only fake here.
You don't know what he thinks.
We know what he thinks. He thinks God's pure simplicity. He believes in Platonism, which is not the biblical picture of God. Platonism is false, the sire.
You guys remember in Genesis 18 when the three men showed up to Abraham?
Right.
Yeah, but I know that a lot of people think one of them was a pre-incarnate Christ, and they'll readily admit that two of them are angels. I think all three are angels. But they're called men, but we know that they're not normal men.
Benjamin Summers in his book says, we don't know if 1, 2, or 3 are Yahweh. They all three could be Yahweh.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, Bodies of God, Benjamin Summers. The other book I was looking for earlier was Mark Smith's Where the Gods Are, which talks about the different types of God's bodies. Both good books. Highly recommend.
Does he go into any kind of explanation on why Yahweh would tell Moses, you can't see my face, but then all three Yahwehs can show up to Abraham and everything's okay?
Because he has different types of bodies, and so some are okay to be seen, some aren't. You have the Isaiah passage where Isaiah sees God's body when he's brought up. He says, oh no, I'm undone, I'm going to die now. But then in order to make sure he doesn't die, they go through a coal purification process. And so that's the face of God that Moses can't see. Isaiah is able to see that with the coal purification.
Is that modalism? Is that a form of modalism?
It could be. Here's the thing. If anyone talks about the Trinity, well, they're all of a sudden a heretic in some capacity based on the only way not to be a heretic is not talk about it.
Well, that's why classic Nicene Trinitarianism really is technically monarchical, which often is called Unitarian. It's when you get into the nuance of it, like people that subscribe to like a Western model with the flow quote, they're going to turn around and say monarchical Trinitarianism is too close to Unitarian and it's too much like modalism, and nobody agrees on it. But I subscribe to monarchical Trinitarianism.
Or is it trying to express a character trait about him?
I don't think it's literal there at all. It says Exodus 15 is referring to the deliverance. It's
so
Exodus
in Amos,
15, not
when
numbers.
he's saying
Let me
God
answer.
is not a
Don't
man.
interrupt me.
That's a lot of answer.
Exodus 15 is talking about the deliverance at the sea. We're explicitly told that the Israelites did not see God. But in Exodus 15:3, it's talking about him as a man of war defending Israel and defeating the Egyptians. So it can't be literal because the people never saw a man.
Okay. Neither have I ever made a case.
Since we're doing a debate review, this did not come to my mind in this particular moment, but listening upon it a second time, he's rephrasing the Exodus 15 passage to which he claims that the Israelites say, or the passage says the Israelites did not see God, yet he argues that God is and was seen by them as the angel of the Lord.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's the whole passage, the discussion. God says, I can't be around you guys because if I'm here, I'm just going to want to kill you all. So I'm going to send the angel of the Lord instead. And Moses says, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. We need you here, God. And God says, oh, okay. And he changes his mind and decides to stay with him and still be with them. So it's interesting.
But didn't they have to meet at the tent of meeting though, outside the camp? There was like a whole restructuring in how Moses interacted with the glory cloud that dropped down.
Right. And so there's all those interactions, but it's interesting that it's location based. And one of the weirdest rules you're going to find in the Old Testament is camp rules, where if you poop somewhere, you got to go bury your poop, because if God is walking through your camp, he might see it and it'll be unsightly. And so there's some sort of physical presence, maybe like a Garden of Eden type thing, where Yahweh, God, is with Israel, a presence which can be taken away and replaced with some sort of angel.
Tell Irenic in the live chat that this is a different shirt. This is Burrito, and that was a different shirt last night.
One of the things you were mentioning is
It looks the same in this lighting, but this is a different gray shirt with a different logo.
One of the things you were mentioning about walking through the camp, when you look at Isaiah, that's the test of the false gods, the dead idols. As God says, look, I can put one foot in front of the other. I can walk. I can do things. And he's using embodied language, and he's using temporal language as a testament of him being the living, powerful, true God of all. And that doesn't seem to comport very well with this Neoplatonic metaphysical model that Anthony wants to endorse.
So if I'm a Calvinist and I'm rewriting the Bible, I'd be like, your pagan idols, they have noses, but they can't smell. They have eyes, but they can't see. They have ears, but they can't hear. Our God doesn't have any of those. So it makes sense why he can't do any of those.
Mankind in a man body.
Right. So you're about to say, give us your honest opinion.
Right. Does God have a body with, does God have a male body in your guys' opinion?
Yeah. When what you didn't point out is when God said, let's make man in our image, the same word is used just a little bit later for Adam and Eve having children in their image. And in their image, they had these children. And that same image language is used throughout Genesis.
Well, in my opening, I used Genesis 5:1 and Genesis 9:3.
I might have missed that. But
I hear you. So is that a yes? You guys think that the Father has an actual male, what we would consider a male body, like we're made in that he doesn't look like a woman.
Right.
Has a beard, real white hair, real feet and hands, real male posture.
Right. The ancient Semitic concept was El rules in a court and has a white flowing beard, as you see in Daniel. And he rules in the throne room, as you see in Job 1 and 1 Kings 22 and elsewhere. God rules from a throne. So God has a male body. I think God has multiple bodies. I think God has all sorts of bodies. But male is the primary. He's never called a female, even though there are some female descriptions of him. There's like breastfeeding imagery somewhere, but overwhelmingly he's described as male.
Do you guys think that angels are male?
Yeah. I think that's what made the women attractive to them.
I would agree with you. Have you guys heard people argue for female angels ever?
I also wish to note that when Chris Fisher says he believes the Trinity, remember what the Trinity is on his view. If you affirm the Trinity on his view, you must deny the hypostatic union. I believe on his view, he follows Sommer's treatment, but basically the Trinity ends up being a multi-bodied organism. He's in other videos given examples of mutants. So like in X-Men, there may be somebody who shares a bunch of bodies, but none of the bodies exhaust the mind of a specific creature thing. That's fine. I'm just giving this as background. Clearly, but I will note, nobody corrects him. Nobody disagrees with him. He is allowed to speak for everybody of the group. And it seems like this is a review given from the pro God has a bod theology group. So it's kind of hard to see how Warren's going to get out of the charge that he was just simply wrong about what he said on the Pritchett show, which was only 3 months prior. It's not like it's like a year or something or years ago. And this was recent, relatively, to, current events. I mean, it's a big shift to go to thinking God has a bod. It's not just you wake up one day believing. I would also like to note that Warren McGrew did a video in response to Tyler Vela's appearance on Vocab Malone's show. And he criticizes, well, he doesn't criticize, he doesn't say anything, he doesn't appear in the video, but it seems like we're supposed to see the clips and understand his criticism.
I actually think open theists, their view of God is like a mega Zeus. I still think God is simple, assay, necessary, right? I still hold to those types of beliefs.
Right.
There was actually a strong disconnect between that very high view of God and the very national pagan Yahweh of the Old Testament.
Let me ask you a question, because I want to make sure our definitions are right here. You use the word pagan multiple times, just so that we're properly defining this, because when I research in scholarship, the term is a fuzzy one.
It is.
Usually I'll use it to kind of refer to, when I use pagan, I'll put it in quotations to say, I'm saying non-Jewish or something like that. But the way you're describing it, it sounds like you're saying the God that looks like the Zeus, like the other demigods in the world.
I actually think open theists, their view of God is like a mega Zeus.
because Tyler called the God of the Bible a Hebraic Megazeus due to his philosophical presuppositions.
Well, no, I still think that the God of open theism is a Hebraic Megazeus.
Is Idol Killer an open theist?
He's an open theist, yeah.
Well, we got an interesting impasse here then. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't think the God of the Bible is a Hebraic Megazeus.
The God that looks like the Zeus, like the other demigods in the world.
Hagen, Yahweh of the Old Testament. At this point, because I've said it ad nauseum, it's just a lie at this point. They're kind of like just really big usses.
Yes, and that's actually the ancient Near Eastern concept of gods. So,
that's exactly
so we're on the same page. I just wanted to make sure I understood you right with that.
Yeah. Tyler criticizes McGrew's view for thinking of God as a Megazeus, and Warren McGrew points out that Tyler thinks that the Old Testament teaches that God is a Megazeus, so the Old Testament, in Tyler's view, affirms Warren's view. So Warren's view is biblical. So you hate the biblical God. The problem with that is it concedes kind of what we're all saying, that Warren believes God is a physical, corporeal being like Zeus was, that he's limited, just like Zeus was. And, well, that's just kind of contrary to what Warren McGrew says in the other podcasts, what he does on other shows. I would like some clarification on this, and I hope other people, from seeing these clips and hearing what people say for Warren McGrew, or what Warren McGrew is silent, let's pass, and instead, that maybe he could come out and say some clarifying things.
Jonathan, how would you define heresy?
Well, I will start with, I like what Warren said about the gospel, because Paul says certain types of false gospels are anathema. Okay, so I would start with two categories: the damnable heresy, and then just heresy that's contrary to the teaching that could cause serious division. Now, for me, a damnable heresy, and I stick with the early church on this, would be something contrary to the gospel or something contrary to the nature of God or Christology. So most of the early councils, where they would get the ecumenical councils, like the first four, were talking about the nature of God and the nature of Christ and having these arguments. And the reason why I think that if you define God wrongly, or you define Christ wrongly, you have a Christ that's different than what the Scripture is teaching. So I know I know that, as ecumenical as I am, I know we have people in this audience that are even further out, broader net than me, that would push back and say, okay, so you would say that, like, denying the Trinity, which is, like oneness Pentecostals, for example, you would consider that damnable heresy. And I say yes. And I don't, the word Trinity is not in the Bible, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I don't care. I don't think that we are the beginning of wisdom, but I think there was probably more wisdom in the people who understood Paul's New Testament, the Greek New Testament, than we do. And I think that they can, I defer to their wisdom, that if they think that this is beyond the bounds of orthodoxy, to where if you define God differently, or you define Christ differently, then you have a different God and a different Christ, and that's an idol that needs to be killed. And so I defer to that wisdom.
I will also note that Jonathan Pritchett and Braxton Hunter, at least if we go by what Pritchett says, there didn't seem to be any disagreement with it, that his view of heresy seems to just apply to Warren McGrew then. Which, maybe he'll revise that, this is a podcast and blah, blah, blah. I get how this works. I'm sure there's discussions and such. But I don't see how these just don't apply to Warren McGrew. Warren McGrew thinks God is physical, from all the available evidence we've seen. And he's clearly, I don't even see how open theists don't just come and fall in this category in the first place, because most of them deny aseity. Seems like Warren McGrew has to be in that camp as well. Maybe you have a lower view of aseity, something less robust. It seems like open theists fall prey to this criticism of having a different doctrine of God in the first place. I will also note there was just no pushback on Warren conflating my question basically with regeneration preceding faith because I'm a Calvinist. I wanted a discussion on the issue of sola fide. We all know that Warren McGrew rejects penal substitutionary atonement. The question is, how does he consistently hold the rejection of penal substitutionary atonement and hold to quote-unquote sola fide? I want to know what he thinks sola fide is, especially without the imputation of sin to Christ on the cross. He doesn't have that in his view. So what really is justification in his view? I don't think we get a clear answer here, and I don't think that Hunter and Pritchett do a good job pushing him as to actually answering those questions.
Not an Arminian for the money, so we know that much at least.
That's Elliot Ness, right? Like from the Untouchables. That's right.
So, something like that.
He needed people that wouldn't take bribes.
He says I don't know which one. Oh, I think he means a different comment. I thought he maybe meant the other one. I think he did actually offer you the money. I don't know if he was serious or not, but it would take more than just money to convince you to change your mind. So let's see. This question, he says, do you think Warren rejects sola? I think he meant fide, and it probably autocorrected. If so, where do you get the idea from? Well, his statement of faith over at his website says something to that effect, doesn't it?
I think it does. Hang on, okay. I don't want to misquote, so let me look it up. Warren Doctrine.
His doctrine.
So he defends he doesn't like the term work salvation. It means that someone is attempting to be saved by obeying the law of Moses. It can mean someone. The devil redefines work salvation to mean that if you say you must be holy to be a Christian, or if you say that a true Christian can lose his or her salvation, then you are a work salvationist. You're a heretic. So he's defending works in that sense. Yeah, let me see if I can find it in the actual statement, because I think he's got a comment on
it. In his doctrinal statement, he says that we affirm salvation, eternal life, is a hope yet to be reaped, and in the age to come for those who faithfully endure until the end. Men can only be saved through the work of Jesus Christ, through repentance of sin, confessing he is Lord, and by faithfully remaining in him. And the believer abides in Christ and is considered righteous, born again by the Holy Spirit, turned from sin, and assured of physical resurrection from the grave, provided they do not fall away or turn from faithfulness. So from my standpoint, that is works salvation, whether or not he accepts it or doesn't accept it. And that's from his own doctrinal statement on his own website.
Right, and then And then what I was talking about is that point 6 at the bottom. It's at the very bottom. Work salvation. That's where he talks about work salvation. It means that someone is attempting to be saved by obeying the law of Moses. It could also mean someone is attempting to be saved by good works apart from trusting in Christ. The devil redefines it to mean that if you say we must be holy to be a Christian, or if you say that a true believer can lose his or her salvation, then you're a work salvationist. You're a heretic. So he seems open to be saying that you have to be holy to be a Christian.
And in fact, he's the final grounds for his, he says that all mankind will stand to be judged and judged according to their faithfulness and obedience. And all the faithful followers are the church, and provided they don't fall away and return from faithfulness. So that's kind of the kind of issue that's objectionable in Roman Catholicism. I'm not suggesting he's Roman Catholic, he obviously isn't. So.
Make America great again. Okay, Jim, my question before you move on and you discuss, open theism. Why isn't Christianity? What you say? It just what's your why? Can open theist be a Christian? And then secondly, why would you just consider it not Christian at all, as a heresy, as a damnable heresy, maybe, if you do? I don't know. Or why do you put it as heresy in general? That's my question.
It's all going to come down to how you define the terms, but I would reserve the term open theist for somebody who is denying God's knowledge of the future. That may include the past as well, or something like that, right? But specifically, if the person is going so far to say, the future is indeterminate, so God can't know it, or the future doesn't exist in a very specific sense, so God can't know it. Yeah, as long as I take it that by open theism, it is the standard. In the same way that when you say theist, you mean somebody who believes in God, but there may be some controversial takes on God that people are going to be like, well, I just rule that out as not being a theist, and others being like, well, I just rule it in as it being a theist. And so there's kind of a language question behind that. If we're ignoring those kinds of debates, then when you say open theist, is that heresy, damnable heresy? Then I would say yes. If you say that God doesn't know the future, if you hold to that consistently, genuinely, yeah, that's incompatible with the God of the Bible. And the reason, like, look at Matt Slick's argument, right? It's perfect, easy and profoundly illuminating on the topic. How in the world can Jesus pay for the sins of all believers if he can't know the future that contains them?
I assume it would be like a perpetual motor thing, like the atonement. Like anytime the new person comes into existence, those sins just kind of get back credited.
Yes, let your anger flow through you.
Frickin' Jimmy,
Yeah, lad.
open theism.
So the motor thing, yeah. Look, there's not going to be there's not going to be an expression of that doesn't make the cross one of two things. Either it's not going to accomplish penal substitutionary atonement in order for that kind of metaphysic to work, or it's going to make it contingent on some kind of, God is basically going to be interacting with other metaphysical entities in order to accomplish all this stuff. Really, I think the only quasi open theist view that really makes any sense was like the view that Tyler had, where God is just decision making each moment. So it's not, to the extent that you could accuse him of not knowing the future. It's only because he hasn't made up his mind, not because he doesn't know it. But I wouldn't really call that open theism. I just call that very confused.
So do you think like our Moraldians and everyone else who's an Almeraldian, Arminians, and all those people, do you think they're all have the same problem then? Because they basically have fundamentally the same view of the atonement. Sometimes.
No, I don't think they do.
But let me object to you.
As open
God,
theists? Okay, go ahead. Maybe I'm wrong. Go ahead.
dude, I'm telling you, when I think about it for a moment, right? And I don't mean all of them. Let me be clear. I'm sure there's other ways people can do this. But like, you ever like talk to an Arminian and they're like, "Oh, well, Jesus died for your sins, right?"
Yeah.
But some of them don't really mean that. They mean something like if you believe, then Jesus really died for your sins. Like the atonement isn't actualized for you.
Yeah, but I don't think that's not, just to be clear, that's not my objection. My objection is, so I just take that to be an inconsistent version of PSA, right? They're inconsistent. They have like this extra belief, right? The essential belief is that Jesus died to pay for your sins and you get his righteousness. That's like the underlying belief. But then they have this extra theological construct that's tremendously false, that is somehow contingent on your belief. And you could get into heresy if you try to make that logically consistent. But I think most Arminians are happy to leave that in mystery, and insofar as they do, I'm happy to say, okay, well, they got a happy inconsistency then. But what I'm accusing open theists of doing is something like the same thing that universalists do, or like what Warren McGrew does, right? The incarnation and the cross do not even accomplish propitiation of God's wrath. That's not even what they're after. That's where you get into the dangerous territory, right? That's where the heresy is, not the whole belief and free will part. That's stupid, but like, okay, dumb mistake. I don't think you're going to hell for that. But if you start playing around with penal substitutionary atonement, that's where it gets really dangerous. And I think you're going to have to, if you're genuinely holding to open theism, you understand the concept, you understand something of the philosophy involved, you're making these arguments, you're disagreeing with people who are making good objections against you, and so you're following that train of thought to its logical end, there is no way to keep something like penal substitutionary atonement. It's just not compatible with a God who has not planned out all the world. Even if that has to be the simple foreknowledge view, which, even though it's stupid, is not the same thing in my book as saying God literally doesn't know what's going to happen.
Would there be any other additional reasons you might say that open theists don't make the cut? Do you think there's like a core set of like attributes people need to like affirm, or I don't know how to put it. Like, you know what I mean?
The one I'm pointing to, right, is just justification. I think I'm just saying, hey, even if you only have the understanding of a child, even if you're not able to articulate it, even if you say things that are inconsistent with it, like I think Arminians do, to me, you cannot. You have to have some minimally primordial childlike belief in substitutionary atonement in order to believe in justification. Otherwise, you've got something akin to like a Roman Catholic view, or even worse. So my problem with open theism is that, well, look at people like Warren McGrew, right? They understand that there's no way the picture of God where we're motivated to say he doesn't know the future because he's quote unquote free is the same motivations that get rid of, should we follow them to their logical conclusion, penal substitutionary atonement, and therefore justification. And if you get rid of justification, you no longer have the gospel. There's no gospel, there's no Christianity. You just got paganism.
Do you think they even have a God in their view, or going back to that prior debate? Like, do you think there's?
Well, so that's where I would want to be polemical for the sake of sticking out my tongue at them, maybe a little too much. But no, I don't. I mean, they do have a God, right? But they're not strictly, in the strictest sense of the term, right? They're not monotheists.
Explain.
God is not in control. He's not sovereign. He does not have ultimate status over the universe. He is the most powerful player on the board. He may even have the cheat codes, but everything that he's got is something he's inheriting from the metaphysical rules of the cosmos. Remember, we've talked to Perry before, right? He's the same thing. He's going to tell you, like, he's going to give you this view in which at bottom there's just these verities. There's just these sort of game rules that are controlling the cosmos, and that even goes for God, and he's subject to those.
So, can you define just monotheism then? Because maybe it's like they have a different concept of monotheism. Because they're just going to say it's like the belief in like one divine being or something.
Yeah, I don't think that's sufficient, right? The being in question has to be God, the supreme being, and that word supreme there means he's ultimate. He has a freedom and supremacy over everything else that nothing can hold against him. And even an Arminian is going to say, yeah, like God didn't have to choose to create this world. You know, God's not limited to any of these things. I think the better Arminians are even going to say something like, yeah, if God wanted to, he could create a Calvinist world. He just didn't want to.
How would you go about making open theism heresy again? Like, how would you put it that would convince a standard normal people in general? My focus would be on aseity. It's just my idea of how I would do it. It's like I'd say, look, aseity. Either God is kind of in his own class of things, or he's just like the rest of us in classes of things, and not distinct from the world, or something like that.
Yeah. So if I think there's two. There's probably more, right? But to my mind, there's two things that come to me, and one of them is what you're saying, which is the theology proper stuff. The not the Christology, not the pneumatology, not ecclesiology, but theology in particular. And you're saying basically, this is how I put it. How does an open theist distinguish his supposed monotheism from polytheism with just one God, lowercase g? And the answer is he can't. It's just a polytheistic worldview that happens to have one person on the council instead of a panoply. And you might argue that like via aseity and immutability and all that other stuff. But ultimately, like the issue is that the universe is in control and God is just an inhabitant. He's not really the creator. Like even in Molinist and Arminian systems, there's inconsistency, but they hold at core that God is sovereign over the universe. And then, but the other issue to me, dude, is that open theism cannot really make sense of the judicial aspect of Christ's work. That, like, I have to think about how I would want to say this. There is an argument I sense lurking in open theism's take on the atonement because God is not bringing these things about purposefully. It's all just him reacting to what's going on. But then how does he guarantee salvation for people through Jesus? It just seems straightforwardly inconsistent to think that a God who is not so in control that he knows absolutely what's going to happen, it just seems inconsistent to say that that God can have promises that are indubitable about what's going to happen. And that's why you get people like Chris Fisher, but at least he kind of tacitly concedes the issue. He'll just say, well, is it really that hard to predict how a football game's going to go? Right? He makes this stupid rhetorical bouquets because if he doesn't do that, he'll just be conceding that, like, oh yeah, like God can't really promise anything. He can't really ensure that his son's blood is going to satisfy his wrath. He can't really ensure that his wrath is like a universal paradigm and not something he's going to change his mind about tomorrow. These things are just up in the air. And like the promise of the gospel is the most absolute thing in reality. Yeah, it just seems to be there's going to be problems with. The problem is, how do I put this? Think of it this way. If God does not know the future, then how can you escape saying he goes from a state of ignorance about some event to knowledge once that event becomes the present? You're just going to say, like, well, it didn't exist, so you couldn't be ignorant about it. But that's going to create problems because then there are things, then the very notion of possibility is not controlled by God. What the future holds, insofar as it's controlled by him, it would just be known by him. But if he doesn't know it, and it doesn't exist to be known, but it's still something that's going to come to pass, that seems obviously problematic. And that's the sort of thing that problematizes the atonement. Because now you have a changing God behind it.
And also, I think like the other issue is like we agreed upon this one. I don't think they find it persuasive because a lot of them are just going to concede that when they look at passages teaching God is unchanging, they're going to argue that those are about his like character or his covenant promises, right? So,
But this is very much like saying, this is very much like Chris Fisher doing something like, God can be wrong, but that doesn't mean that the Bible can be wrong. That's the one exception. The problem is that once you have tried to cut God up according to that distinction, whether it's fallibility or whether it's change, either there's going to be some more ultimate metaphysical tools in your ontological lunchbox that's making God that way, So you can rely on him in some respects, and you don't have to rely on him in others, because there's this further thing that tells you when he is or isn't reliable. Or you just have to say that there's nothing back of God, in which case, hey, if he can change, then his character can change. It was silly to say, but these are texts about his character. So what? I mean, God is a changing being, simplicator. Like, there's nothing more to say then. Who are you to say that his character can't change then? You're just going to list more theological facts, and those theological facts are going to be, just facts about the nature of a changing God. And so those facts themselves can change. There was a friend I had who was kind of trying to avoid being a Calvinist. And we were having a conversation about God's foreknowledge. And he was a sharp kid. He was not dumb. He was smart. And so as he's like reasoning, as he's like exploring his own position to try to see how he could be consistent and maybe come up with some objections to mine, he's over there reasoning out loud, somewhat to me, somewhat to himself, and he's talking about something to the effect that he says that, well, God could just know what's possible before it happens, and so he's prepared for anything that happens. And then before I even said anything, he thought to himself, but the problem with that is just that God would, if God knows everything, he would just know the actual state of affairs as distinct from what's merely possible. That might not be his exact wording. Is that what you're talking about, Bonson?
Yeah, that's the exact story I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, that is the problem, right? There's not a way to really make sense of ignorance about the future if you're omniscient.
Yeah, the whole thing, the whole crux of the issue is on the knowledge of God. Like if you're trying to avoid indeterminism, if you're trying to avoid determinism, then if God knows what's going to happen, right? If he has all knowledge of possible events and actual events, then it's just going to follow that everything is determined. And when it comes to whether or not things are determined, like all things are determined by God or not, it's like that. It does get a little weird when you start talking about things that come to pass that are either determined by God or not, and factor in God's eternality and his transcendence to time and space. And the fact that there is the creator-creation distinction does kind of, it does kind of hint at the possibility of certain things being, undetermined or it hints to like the possibility of God not being the one who determines all things. But I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, that a faithful appraisal of God's knowledge is just going to result in determinism. But I mean, even the Arminian with simple foreknowledge or with Mysterianism, at least he can say that God knows the future, and they may have like an inconsistent picture of the atonement, but the key thing is that God's trustworthiness and his ability to save people is not put into question. But that seems to be the open theist returning problem. I think that's why you called it corrosive, Watson, because that picture of God makes him completely unreliable. Like, there's no reason to trust the Bible as a special text. There's no reason to think that he can't change his mind about some of the most. I mean, that's the moral argument that you always bring up. that he could change his mind about what the very nature of right and wrong is, there's no reason to think that that Christ has really succeeded in dying for the right people, because he doesn't know who those people are going to be in the future.